We all want to be happier, but how do we get there? First, we start by realizing happiness is not a destination. Being happy consists of micro action steps every single day. I'm your host, Brittany King, and I'm here to guide you along the way. Well, hello, my beautiful friend, and welcome back to the Positively Real podcast. I'm your host and your coach, Brittany King, and we had another episode, emotional liberation, diving into all things emotions this month. It's funny because usually around July, I'm all about the halfway point and checking in with your vision and your goals, which is obviously a very important thing to do around halfway through the year. But without your emotions, having an emotional awareness, without being able to have strategies to manage emotions, checking in halfway through the year can actually set you back because if it drives fear, if it drives anxiety, worry, if it creates anxiety, worry, it just puts you further away than from where you really want to be. So, checking in with your emotions and understanding your emotions are actually a very important piece to a mid-year checkpoint. So that's why I am diving into all things emotions. Last week we talked about joy and sadness. This week we're talking about anger and shame. Oh, yeah, we're going there. And it's really funny because the day that I was planning on recording this for you, I am in the process of potty learning with my daughter, and is going really well for the first couple days. And then I think I got a little too focused on the outcome versus following, teaching my daughter the process. And there were moments where I felt so angry, so defeated, all the things, which then underneath that emotion of anger was shame. I was shaming myself that I was doing something wrong or that I was wrong. It was just also fascinating. But I know how to manage my anger sometimes. And I was able to really stay calm and grounded um, throughout the process, but I could not record the episode because I was actually extremely dysregulated. I had my daughter borrow all of my regulation, and I felt like I was so defeated and so depleted because she had an epic meltdown that day that I was planning on recording. And I just stayed calm. I was planted like a tree, and it took everything in my power to not react. And it was so hard. But anger was a predominant emotion there, which I know is kind of like it's like a top layer emotion, and then underneath it there's other emotions. So I'll get into that. But anyway, it's just funny that I had this schedule to record on the day that I got so dysregulated, felt so much anger, followed by shame, like just the whole gamut. The other thing that I love about this episode is I talked about the book The Grand Hotel of Feelings and it's really funny. Ellie's favorite emotions in that book are gratitude and anger. She is so fascinated with the anger page. Like she can't wait to get to anger. In fact, we have little figurines and magnetiles that we're building with, and we built the Grand Hotel of Feelings and anger. Like she has an anger character, and we're always checking in on anger. And what was so fascinating was she showed my nanny how I helped her with her anger, like in her own way of acting it out, how she was saying angers, like she was yelling and like doing this thing with the figurine. And then she like held the figurine tight. And that's what I did with Ellie because she wasn't being safe. And my job is to keep her safe. And so she was able to act that out, which I think was mind blowing. But anger is something that has been coming up a lot for me, not just in the past week. Um, so really since my daughter's become 2, a little past 2, not really at the age milestone of 2, but, as she's been able to express her needs or lack of needs at those moments, and then understanding my anger because I have been learning more and more that the anger that I'm experiencing because I have unmet needs. And also, I suppressed anger my whole entire life. Like, I don't think anyone would have ever identified with me as being angry. I do kind of recall these moments when I was in high school and given a ton of Adderall for the diagnosis of ADHD. And I remember becoming like a totally different person. And those are the only times that I really remember feeling angry, but also suppressing it. And so seeing anger and frustration come out in my daughter has been super triggering for me because I didn't have a skill set to work with anger and frustration. I shoved it so far down. And since I've been doing so much work on myself, my nervous system, my body, all the things, it's like I can't shove it down anymore. So it's been very fascinating, really working and like to the point of rage. And I know I'm not alone in this, especially moms. I find that rage is just kind of you get your lid gets blown. You're like ignoring the anger over and over again. But anger is such an important emotion. It's such an important emotion, and it's really important that I teach my daughter the importance of this emotion. And I love that this book, The Grand Hotel of Feelings, is helping facilitate that. It's just incredible. So let's talk about why anger and shame are so important for emotional liberation. Number one, like, especially if you're a female, we push it down, we shove down anger. We think it's bad to be angry. Anger is just trying to communicate with us. It's trying to tell us to pay attention. There is most likely an unmet need or something that's going on that we are ignoring. And then shame is important to pay attention to because anger is usually protecting shame because shame is such a vulnerable emotion. And when we can really understand these emotions, they don't have control over us. But I know personally, I would never let myself feel angry because I felt like it was going to make me out of control. And then shame, I never was able to actually identify shame. I just always had these thoughts that there was something wrong with me. And anytime something that would happen that I would get in trouble, I instantly defaulted to I am bad. And so these are so tied together. And I'm going to talk about insights that I've learned from Dr. Becky and Brene Brown about these emotions. And Brene Brown is a shame researcher, so she's a phenomenal resource for this. So if you want to dive deeper into understanding these emotions, I highly recommend following her work if you don't already. But I do want to just share how I've been integrating this and understanding it on a deeper level and how grateful I am for the tantrums, for the meltdowns, because they are so triggering to me and they're so developmentally appropriate and important to like watch someone be so convicted in the desire that they have that they like lose all control over their body and they don't know how to regulate. But it's like so fascinating and realizing like I don't think I ever was able to do that when I was younger, probably because it just didn't feel safe to have those big emotions. And when my daughter was having big big emotions, I stayed planted like a tree. I just didn't say anything. I just held space. And when she started to slowly calm down, I just kept telling her that her emotions don't scare me. And this is a huge step for me because when the meltdowns first started to happen, and I'm saying like they very much happen far and few between. Like they don't happen all the time. So when they do, and then when they did in the beginning, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle it. I would try to do all the things and I like would just get to this point where I would get so angry and it would scare me. And then I would feel shameful. And because of this work, because I'm able to regulate and then process these emotions, I don't hold on to them. So see it as a big sign of growth that I can sit and hold space for my daughter and tell her that her emotions don't scare me and she's safe over and over again until she comes back down and grounds herself and borrowing my regulation. So we're going to talk about anger and then we'll talk about shame because they are directly connected. Now, anger is a natural, intense emotional response to perceive wrongs, injustice, and also something that just doesn't feel right in your life. And it serves as a signal that something important needs to be addressed. or change. And I've talked about this before on the podcast about injustice or when there's something that feels wrong in the world. Like it's a very productive emotion when we utilize it in that way, right? To take productive, intentional line action. What happens is when we avoid feeling it and we suppress it and we push it down, that's when the behavior becomes very undesirable. And that's when it can be kind of dangerous when we suppress anger. Now, one of the things that I love about Dr. Becky's work is she talks about anger as a secondary emotion. And this is so true because I think that it does show up and it cover up more of vulnerable emotions like fear, sadness, or shame. And in the book, the Grand Hotel of Feelings, the way that they illustrate this is amazing because they say, the manager's talking about how you have to give anger like a big room because it needs to be loud and needs to like have the space to be um angry and feel all the feelings. And then the next page, the manager talks about how she made the mistake one time of putting anger in a small room. And what she learned is if you put anger in a small room, then it turns into depression, sadness, or even shame. And I just think that it's such a easy way to really recognize like what happens when we don't allow ourselves to feel angry. And so with, my daughter, like when she's feeling angry, she might actually be feeling a sense of disconnection or that makes her feel afraid, or she might be feeling insecure. And instead of looking at the behavior of like the way she's acting, I want to understand like the emotion behind it. And I think that's what we need to do as adults for ourselves to become more emotionally aware is if we are behaving in a certain way, instead of looking at ourselves and judging ourselves for our behavior, look at the behavior as a window into what emotion that we might be feeling. And the more that you can do this, the more free you become. And so, one of the things that is so important when it comes to anger is having so much self compassion. The moments that I've had, like, I get so angry, like, I could feel the cortisol, I could feel the adrenaline. It was like coursing through my system. And being able to have a lot of self compassion, right, when feeling angry is really key. And I love this practice of a compassion break where you acknowledge, like, I'm feeling angry right now, validating it. It's okay that I'm feeling angry. It makes sense. It's a protective mechanism. It's an adaptive behavior that shows up to protect us. I also think a part of that self compassion is bringing in some shared humanity, knowing that I tell myself, I'm like, I am not the only mom that feels this way. Like, I know that other moms and other caregivers feel this way. And then I just allow myself to feel it. Now, sometimes I just need to feel the anger, but a lot of times I need to discharge it. I need to get it out of my system. So I will move my body. I will shake my arms. I will throw my arms down. I will hit a pillow. I will scream. And I find that that's the most effective way. So I allow it. I'm like, you can be here, anger, but I am going to like use my body to get it out of my system. And 10 out of 10 times, I feel so much better. Now, other times when I felt angry, I call it rage on the page. And I did not create this, Gabby Bernstein did, but it's setting a timer for 20 minutes. And I like to play angry music while doing it. I find that System of a Down is a very effective strategy. And I just write all the reasons why I'm so angry. And a lot of times I end up just like scribbling. It's not even, you can't even read it, which is the point. You're not supposed to read it. You just need to get it out. And then I sit in stillness. And it's so liberating. I can feel the anger leaving my body. I don't want to hold on to it. And then once I come back down and I regulate, then I can start thinking about what's going on? What needs aren't being met? What is this anger trying to show me? What's it trying to tell me? And it literally anytime that I've had these angry moments, it's because I have an unmet need and I know it. And lately it's been sleep. It's been sleep and it makes total sense. And so when I can validate that for myself, it takes the shame that comes up away. And so, when we feel angry, we feel vulnerable, right? We feel exposed. And that shows up a lot, especially for me in parenting of like, I don't have this figured out, right? Like there's some perfectionism of trying to do it all and do it all right and perfect. But we feel threatened. And the threat a lot of times is just a need, right? Like some sort of basic human needs not being met, and that feels very threatening. Now, the important things when it comes to anger is making sure you have strategies to manage it in a healthy, productive way. Because if you don't look at your anger, it will fester into resentment. And I remember, like recently, I was having thoughts that were making me feel resentful towards my 2-year old. Now, this is not logic. This is my primitive brain. But I was like so aware of them and how it felt that I like was able to pull myself out of it so quickly and realize like, wow, like that is because I'm not managing it right now. Like because I'm feeling resentful, like I was going into all these thoughts that were so unhelpful of like all of the things that I'm doing and trying and like it was so like now I can laugh at it, but in that moment it felt so real. But because I have had that awareness, I was able to kind of redirect that and stop that spiral pretty quickly. But anyway, if you are feeling resentful towards anyone in your life, check in with anger and how you're managing it and how important it is for you to set boundaries within yourself and boundaries within your life, because a lot of times that anger is because you just don't have very strong boundaries. And it made total sense for me because wasn't having boundaries with my daughter at that time. I was like kind of going back and forth and I wasn't being consistent. So it's like, of course this is coming up. So it's just all so helpful. And even resentment was leading me to anger. Like I could track the breadcrumbs, and it's so important to be able to do that for yourself, to free yourself of these emotions and know that it's okay to feel angry. It is okay to feel angry. So when we approach anger with self-compassion and understand that it's trying to protect you, right? When you feel angry, what I want to offer you is asking yourself what other emotions might be under this anger. Like, what emotion is anger trying to protect? And that's just going to open up this whole world of connection within yourself. And so, when you are able to do that, then you can feel those difficult emotions. Like I have sat with shame, and shame isn't an emotion I discharge. Shame is an emotion that I just allow myself to be with. And I find that shame really helps to be witnessed. So when I've had a moment that I felt shameful for example, throwing a diaper at my daughter, she thought it was funny. I did not. I talked about it. I told my sister, I told my husband, I just needed to talk about it so I could be witness, so I could stop feeling shameful about my behavior. And so there's just so much power in that. So that's anger. Now let's talk about shame. So shame is the feeling of being inherently flawed or unworthy. And I really want to first talk about the distinction between shame and guilt, because I think that it's really important to separate them because they are not the same. And Brene Brown describes it the best, where guilt is I did something wrong, and shame is I am wrong or I am bad. And so guilt is feeling bad about an action, while shame is feeling bad about one self. So, shame, the way that shame shows up in our behaviors is avoidance, aggression, and even people pleasing. So, a lot of times we have these not a lot, all the time, we have these maladaptive behaviors to protect us from feeling the emotion. That's why if we look at the behaviors as a symptom and then we can go backwards with what we were feeling and then we allow ourselves to feel it, then we are free. And that is the point of emotional liberation. So, shame is that feeling of being inherently flawed or unworthy. And let me tell you, when I think I spent most of my life feeling inherently flawed, That's most of my life. I always thought something was wrong with me. And then when I got into personal development work, I started realizing on a conscious level, there was nothing wrong with me, but on a subconscious level, I was still looking for the thing that was wrong with me, trying to fix the problem. And let me tell you, if you resonate with that, I want to tell you right now, you are not broken. You are not a problem to be solved. What actually needs to happen is you need to feel and be present with your emotions. Because if you can feel and be present with your emotions and really allow yourself to be so connected to yourself, you'll realize your essence that you are inherently worthy and there is nothing wrong with you. When we default to thinking there's something wrong with us, this is just something that we adapted from our environment, from our childhood. And you don't have to go into like what was the root cause, like what was the interaction, what was the circumstance, what was the thing that happened to cause this. Like if you can get there, great. But a lot of times it's not about that. It's just feeling the emotions that kind of get stuck in our body from those experiences. So shame really leads to actions that are undesirable. So if we have these undesirable actions, that's where you really want to start is looking at your behaviors and see what emotion is linked to those behaviors. One of the ways that I find to be really productive for managing shame is for self-reflection, being able to really reflect on the times where you feel really small or you feel like there's something inherently wrong. And when you ask yourself the question, what's wrong with you? And you answer it with all of these sentences, these thoughts that are like evidence of what's wrong with you, that's a really good place to start. So, self reflecting, I think, is the first place to start when it comes to shame, because shame is really sneaky. It loves to hide in the shadows. It's the things we don't want to talk about. It's the things we don't love about ourselves, things we don't feel safe, feels like if we share it, that we are going to be unlovable and we're unworthy of the connections in our life that further push us away from people, which a lot of times, at least for me, I was so afraid of not being loved that I would hide all these parts of myself that I felt were very much broken and wrong with me. Now, Dr. Becky or Brene Brown's antidote to shame is empathy. And that's what I said I earlier when I threw a diaper at my daughter when I was so frustrated. Um, Sharing and talking it out loud like took away the power of shame. And not, you don't just blast it like I am on the podcast. Obviously, I've worked on this, but like people that you trust, people that will validate you, people that see you. And the more that you can talk about the things that you feel shame about, the less power that it has. And I think that that is a beautiful thing. And it's so simple. It's so, so simple. And so, one of the things that I've been working on is figuring out what my shame triggers are because there are certain things that trigger the shame. And now I'm very aware of the thought pattern that it takes me to. And it just takes a little bit of time. And I will say that having someone that you trust, whether that's a therapist, a coach, someone that you really can be witnessed in this, is very important because it takes a lot of awareness and it's kind of painful. Like to look at the parts of yourself that you think are broken and wrong, like this, it's not easy to do. So that's why we don't do it in like solo. But when you reach out for support and you have someone there to witness you, it really helps manage the shame. It really helps manage the shame. So now I want to talk about some practical strategies that we can utilize to help, identify and understand shame triggers, but then also dive into practical tips for managing anger and shame because I do believe in my own experience how deeply connected they are. Like I said earlier, it's one of those emotions that like it's protecting the more vulnerable emotion. So it might not always, anger might not be always linked to shame, but I do find within myself, and I've noticed with my clients, that the correlation between the two, like when we really remove the anger and we go to like what's actually going on, shame's usually just right there. So let's talk about some practical strategies for managing anger and shame. So the first thing is when you're feeling triggered and you feel really angry, regulating is the first step. Anchoring and feeling safe. When I'm feeling triggered and I'm feeling angry, things feel out of control, it doesn't feel safe. I have to ground myself first. I have to regulate myself first. So the nervous system plays a huge part in this, especially because anger is trying to communicate, right, some sort of threat. Um, and the first is stopping what you're doing. Sometimes it's removing yourself so you can like have a safe container to be with these intense sensations, because it is super intense. It's fiery, it's hot. Like I can feel my whole body shake. And it's such a gift because I never allowed myself to do that, but it's really, really hard. So the first thing I do is I ground, I orient, I let myself know I'm safe. I go inside of my body. I find out the parts of my body that anger is living, that don't feel safe. And then I just work on relaxing my body. I work on ways, and a lot of times it's just deep breathing. So I'll inhale for 4 and I'll exhale for 8. Now, like I said, a lot of times when the anger is really intense, I have to move my body. I have to move it. I have to throw my hands open. I have to throw my arms down. I like to shake. I'll hit a pillow. I'll scream into a pillow. If I'm in my car, it's a very effective place to yell at the top of your lungs. It's so cathartic. It is such a release, and you can feel the release from your body. So, having that mindfulness and then self-regulation. And self-regulation is not a one-time event, but it definitely, when you're in the heat of a stress response and your nervous system gets super activated, that's where you have to go first. You have to allow yourself to regulate and ground before you even allow yourself to feel, and actually process the emotion. So that's number one. And then number two is building a self compassion practice, really deepening your relationship with yourself. And the best thing that you can do in those moments is speak to yourself as if a friend was angry or feeling shame. It's the best thing we can do. One of the things that I do when I'm having a hard moment, and I adopted this from Dr. Becky, is just telling myself, I'm a good mom who's having a hard time right now. And once I get through all of that, then I can really look at my behaviors and be like, okay, that wasn't ideal. Like, this is what I did, and like, this is what I'll do next time. And it stops the spiral from happening. Because the shame spiral comes after the behaviors that we don't love, and then it furthers this belief that there's something inherently wrong with us. So I find that having that compassion, speaking to myself in that kind way, really helps me ground and regulate after those really intense moments. I also, so self-compassion practice, self-regulation, but you have to self-regulate first. I can't emphasize that enough. You have to self-regulate first before you can even consider bringing in any sort of self-compassion. I will say self-compassion helps further the groundedness, but when you try to go directly to that place when you're super activated and stressed out, it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. I've learned that. So then the other strategies I've kind of touched on is developing shame resilience. So learning your triggers and paying attention to the different things that trigger the shame, and then being able to befriend it. And then the other thing is talk to people. Share what's going on with you with someone you trust. And if you don't want to share it with a friend, share it with a therapist, share it with a coach, share it with someone that can hold the space for you without any judgment. And just being able to do that is so powerful, and it really helps take the intensity of the emotion off. I remember when I was I was processing shame with when I was doing somatic therapy, And I remember saying to saying to my therapist, I have been feeling a lot of shame. And she was excited. She was like, all right, like I'm so excited to sit with you with this. And it was so freeing. It was so liberating. And the behaviors that I felt so much shame about, they've stopped percolating. They've stopped just randomly popping into my head at the most random moments. And I find that when I have behaviors from my past that pop into my head in the most random times, whether it's in my dreams or in the shower or when I'm getting my hair cut, I know that I have some feeling to do around that. And that's the key. It's like I can't undo the past, but if I can understand myself and understand why those behaviors happened and what emotions were driving them, it takes away the shame spiral, shakes away the shame's control, because I know shame feels like it really controls us. So that's what I have for you about anger and shame. I hope that this helped you kind of see your own emotions in a different light and gave some strategies to help work with them. I did mention the rage on the page. If you've never done that before, I highly recommend I highly recommend it. Next time you're feeling angry or frustrated or just heated about something, get it out. Get it out. Let it out. Like, just don't hold on to it, because then once you give yourself the space from it, then you can start thinking about what action that you want to take, what becomes more clear to you. But the more you hold on to it, it's like poison to your body, and it manifests in the most undesirable ways. Anger and shame. Now, these emotions, like I said in my episode about emotional liberation, they're not right, wrong, bad, or good. They're just emotions, and they're constantly trying to communicate with us. So, the more that you can communicate and understand your emotions, the more free you will be. All right, my friend. The last thing I do want to share, I didn't share this resource before. I've obviously talked about the um, the Grand Hotel of Feelings, which, whether or not you have a kid, I really recommend you listen to, or not listen, you read this book. But if you haven't read The Emotion Code, it breaks down the emotions, where they get stuck in our body, why they get stuck in our body, and it's very helpful if you want to dive deeper into this. So add that to the resource list with Dr. Becky and Brene Brown. So make sure you're practicing self-compassion. Make sure you ask for help, seek support when when you're experiencing a lot of anger or shame. And if you have any questions at all, I am here to support you. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. Remember to love yourself, own your happiness, and let your light shine, because you're so worthy of it. Until next time.